I got up this morning in thinking about what God is doing in the 21st century, and I think that being that when you are called to the prophetic side of God, the side of God that makes the announcement, the side of God that interprets and declares, it is important that you help the people of God to understand where we are in this age, in this decade, in this age, in this time. And I want to talk to you for a few minutes about the fact that I totally understand where we are and what God is using us to do and how God is using us to do it. And in the process, there is a word that came up in my spirit that I haven't heard for a while, and the word was called reformation. Haven't heard that word since the early 80s, reformation. The last time I heard the word reformation, that word was being used by the likeness of John Eckhart out of Chicago, Illinois, and several others, because at that time it was a moving of the Spirit of God from just the normal worship and the normal praise and the normal status of the church, and it was taking the church into the prophetic age of God. In other words, making room for God to speak and say what it is he wanted to say in that hour at that particular time, and not hindering the presence of God and not clamping and trying to control the presence of God. So reformation was a very powerful word. The very first time reformation was brought to my attention, it was brought to my attention through my own studies. And it was when, back in the age where Martin Luther stamped his theses on the door of the Catholic Church. And he stamped his theses on the door of the Catholic Church because the Catholic Church at that time had declared that the only way that a person can talk to God, they had to talk to God through a person. And so through Martin Luther's studies, he found out that God was accessible to man and that man could come to God face to face. And they didn't need that. And so he stamped his theses on the door of the Catholic Church to declare reformation, which means reformation means to make it better, to redesign it, to re-implement some stuff. Reformation also means to make an adjustment so that it meets the times. And so in this hour of where we are, and I've been preaching about he's doing it in the spirit, we are once again embarking upon the spirit of reformation. And that's why I want you to understand something. I'm not shaken and I'm not moved by what God is using me to accomplish in this warehouse, because I can remember when the church didn't have praise and worship teams. I can remember that. I can remember when they didn't have choirs, and the first person that began to implement the choirs, that person was called crazy. Now choirs is a common thing. The first person that implemented praise and worship teams, they was called crazy. Now praise and worship teams is a common thing. What am I saying? If you're going to be a person that is led by the Spirit of God, you can't be afraid to be different than anybody else, because if we're following everybody else, then how are we the prophetic voice? The prophetic voice is supposed to make an announcement, to announce to the world what is next to come, not what is next to come. Somebody said, what is next to come? Somebody said that again, what is next to come? Say it again like you mean it. What is next to come? Have to make an announcement what is next to come. That's why I don't get shaken about people talking about you ain't got no church. No, we ain't got no church. You ain't got no choir. No, we don't have no choir. We don't miss no choir, and we don't want a choir. I'm not hearing y'all, because ain't nobody got time to spend 30 hours in church. I can sing at home. I need to hear a word Somebody said we're here to make a difference. Somebody said we're here to make a difference. Not trying to be like everybody else, because I believe that when you start talking about the people of God, too many times we have related church to the atmosphere of a building. And so when people are in the presence of God, when they are in the presence of God, they relate that presence to the church and to the choir